In 1963, the United States imported 20% of its oil. Today, we import over 60%. In 2001, the world's economy consumed 77 million barrels of oil each day. In 2009, it will need over 90 million. The world's oil producers will be hard-pressed to meet this growth in demand. Many of the major oil-supplying countries are plagued by violence and instability. Global oil infrastructure, the pipelines and tankers that deliver oil supplies to markets every day, are often exposed and vulnerable to attack. The United States economy is increasingly vulnerable to this instability. The U.S. transportation sector is 97% reliant on oil for its energy needs. There are no readily available substitutes. On November 1st, 2007, a group of former senior government officials and energy experts participated in a simulation designed to explore the national security risks of oil dependence.
Oil prices rose to record highs of more than $145 a barrel today on news of serious cuts in global supplies and the threat of a heightened escalation in the dramatic standoff between the West and Iran. Iran is immediately cutting its daily exports of oil by 350,000 barrels, a move that could force global oil prices to unpredictable highs.
If you think of this as, on the one hand, we have this enormously important issue the president's going to have to address. What do we do about Iran? And the consequences that could flow from nuclear weapons in Iran. And on the other hand, if we do impose sanctions along with the EU, what does that mean to our economy? And doesn't it come down to our enormous vulnerability because of our dependence on oil? And when you sort of weigh and balance all of that, how do you start to think about this?
For me, I must say, this is now a question of a calculation of national security. It is not simply economic security, it is national security writ large.
Do you want us to take out their nuclear facilities? Obviously, the implications of a nuclear-armed Iran at this particular time are pretty serious for the balance of power in the region. They create a new geopolitical environment for us.
Are you suggesting, in the context of what's now occurred, that these very dramatic kinds of issues be raised in today's press briefing so that this really does become, in some sense, a relatively historic moment?
I think the sooner the better. The sooner it will have the deterring effect rather than having to be done to really fight.
With the price of oil at $150, there is more breaking news.
Some news just in from Venezuela, where President Hugo Chavez says his country will now join Iran in removing oil exports from the world market.
My phone is ringing off the hook, and every single member I have heard from, and it is a large number and it is bipartisan, they want the president to release something from the SPRO.
There are a range of things we need to do. We need to look at environmentally what we can do in terms of drilling offshore to increase supply, to balance it out. We've got to see what we can do in terms of accelerating research and development. But the short-term things is the only thing we really have, particularly given the very bad situation inventories, aside from the SPRO, is bringing down demand.
When we met in May, I think the Secretary of Energy and I would have both thought that had oil gone this high, this might have been an appropriate time to use the SPRO. And now we see that in this kind of aggressive action, anything that we did could be easily countered by an additional cutoff by Iran and Venezuela.
The energy side of it really ties our hands, because if we're looking at $148 or $150 now, we could be looking at $200.
With all due respect, one of the reasons we are in this sorry condition is the delusion that we have entertained as a nation for the last 10 or 15 years that we can have it both ways. We are engaged in a major world crisis here. It is time for the president to change the paradigm of the whole framework of this dialogue. We are in a national emergency. He's got to treat it that way.
I wonder if one way the president could frame this would say there are parallel delusions, the one you've just described, Mr. Secretary, and also the delusion that we weren't enormously dependent on and therefore vulnerable to the oil situation in the longer term, and secondly, that the change of paradigm has to be that we must finally deal with our long-term susceptibility to and vulnerability to the oil situation. we're facing, in a sense, a double historic moment. Both of this, one is geopolitics, and the other is dependence on oil, and they intersect.
As the simulation comes to an end, a 1% reduction in global supplies has pushed the price of oil to over $160. The result is severe economic damage, a recession, rising unemployment, and double-digit inflation. Although oil shockwave is only a simulation, it could easily become a reality. In today's global economy, the supply of oil barely outpaces demand. Over the next 2 decades, consumption is expected to grow by more than 30%. Balancing this surging oil demand with adequate oil supplies promises to be one of the century's greatest economic and geopolitical challenges.